Greetings, Taku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Vikings episode review right here on Otaku Assemble Weekly, and as always, here to bring you the latest in this week's Vikings episode review. And this is my review of Season 2, Episode 9, entitled The Choice. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode. I was highly satisfied with Episode 9. And this is the episode I'm deeming the deal maker. Not to be confused with the deal breaker. No, this was the deal maker. And that's in regards to, number one, the deals that we saw made in this week's episode. Number two, some personal questions of mine that I had in regards to the series up to this point were finally answered. And then number three, some of the character relationships that I felt needed touching upon or needed some type of resolution were finally addressed. And all in all, I think that this episode did a real good job at sort of getting everything on pace, getting everything on par with where we needed it to be for the season finale, which will take place next week. So those are my general thoughts on the episode as a whole. Now, things I want to talk about in more detail. First off, let's talk about the major deal that we got in this week's episode. And of course, that was the treaty that was finally brokered between King Ecbert, King Al, the Kingdom of Wessex, the Kingdom of Northumbria, and then finally Ragnar and the rest of the Vikings. So we've been learning the last couple of episodes about, what it was King Ecbert wanted, what it was that Ragnar wanted out of this whole deal. And despite the opposition that they've had, they finally managed to come to terms. And number one, I'm just happy that that finally happened because, like I said, there were so many things that could have gone wrong, and especially with the way we ended last week's episode where Horik pretty much killing King Ecbert's envoys, except for Ethelwolf. I was almost positive that it was just going to be, full out war from this point on. And we even opened the episode on that note where Ecbert's saying, hey, they killed my men. We have to answer in kind. And even with that battle, man, I don't know about you guys, but watching the very beginning of that scene, the second when Ragnar and the rest of the Vikings, when they first arrive to the field and you see King Ecbert's men way off yonder, and Horik's like, no, let's march down there and let's face them head on. We have the advantage of the hill. The second that came out of Horik's mouth, I was like, no, you don't. No, you don't. You guys are going to go down that fucking hill. You're going to meet King Ecbert's forces head on, and guess what's going to happen? He's going to fucking flank you from behind and cut off your retreat. So no, you're going to lose the advantage of said hill. And that's not exactly what happened, because Ragnar and his forces being more hesitant just to charge in, that hesitancy allowed them to at least catch the reinforcements as they were coming in from the side, rather than being completely boxed in by them. So there's that. But the point I'm trying to make is I'm actually glad that didn't just result in an all-out slaughter. You know what I mean? But see, that's one of the things I do want to talk about in regards to like the character relationships and how that whole thing was handled. Because my favorite part of the episode was everything that happened with Ethelstan in this week's episode. So let's go ahead and let's break this down in terms of the three main components I mentioned at the beginning of this review. So number one, I just mentioned the deal that was brokered. Now that the battle's over, Ecbert, he went ahead, he pretty much told Ragnar what the deal was, and Ragnar agreed. So now Ragnar's going to get, 5,000 acres of land in Wessex or next to it or what have you, but pretty much in that country. And now Princess Gwenthrith has her mercenary, her Viking mercenaries that she can use in her political struggle over in Mercia. So that's that. But what I want to talk about now is, remember when I mentioned the questions that I had in regards to the series that were finally answered? Ethelstan was one of the biggest ones that we finally got answered. First off, we found out exactly why it was he was so conflicted with his faith. And, because all season long, they make it out to be sort of this, of course it's the questioning of fate sort of thing, but I was still more along the lines that it had something to do with his personal alliances, his physical affiliations, because on the one hand you have the Norse faith, which is tied to Ragnar and the rest of his people, and then on the other hand you have the Christian faith, which is tied to England, which is tied to Ethelstan's homeland, which is tied to Ecbert and the rest of the people of Wessex. And so having Ethelstan in this position where we see him in the former place at the beginning of the season and then the latter place at the end, it made sense that that conflict would actually happen. But we finally heard it from the horse's mouth this episode. Ethelstan said the problem was he legitimately believes in both fates, and his major problem is, how is it that he can have what he claims to be physical evidence? How is it that he can experience physical evidence from both if both fates dictate that they are the only gods? And that's the main reason behind his conflict of fate, that he actually, can testify to both. And to him, it made no sense how they could both equally coexist. But what I loved about the whole thing was the symbolism behind it, because just as Ethelstan is conflicting between these two fates that to him seem to be coexisting at the same time, then if that's the case, why can't Ragnar and King Ecbert coexist? And I like how that was even expanded upon those two characters, because what was the main reason why Ecbert finally decided, it's like, you know what, regardless of what happened to my invoice, regardless of what happened at the battle, we do need to broker peace with them. Why? Because if we wipe them out, how is that going to prevent any more Viking hordes from coming to our shores? And it's like, matter of fact, they might even be greater motivated to do so. It's like, so no, the only way we can nip that in the bud now is to make the peace while we have the chance. And on the other hand, Ragnar, who that whole treaty was what he wanted in the first place, Ragnar seemed to be more relieved that, wow, I can't believe that Horrocks fuck up did not completely nuke this treaty that I'm trying to, get made. The fact that King Ecbert is still willing to extend the olive branch to me despite what happened. Okay, yeah, then we need to go ahead and do this. So once again, like I said, it ties into the whole deal making bit, but it's also it also has something to do about the character relationships. It was also the same thing that we got when we finally saw Ragnar and Ethelstan reunite, and how it was solidified in their conversation. Ragnar, Ragnar never had any animosity against Ethelstan. He was never angry with him or anything like that. If anything, he was relieved to see that he was still alive and he still considered him a friend. And at the same time, Ethelstan told him, when he told him about the conflicting of fates and all that jazz, when they depart, right before they departed, and Ethelstan tells him, good to see you again, my friend. What is it that Ragnar said? Maybe our gods can be friends one day. Once again, this mutual acknowledgement between these two characters, the sort of rekindling of their friendship and whatnot. And yeah, so pretty much the point I'm trying to make is this. Everything that's been going on with Ethelstan, now to me, it finally all makes sense. It finally all ties together, and it finally all works. Is there anything else I need to touch on in that regard? Because I know it's a lot of stuff, and it's all just going through my head right now. But yeah, yeah, I can even talk about how Ethelstan was pretty much praying for the well-being of both Ragnar and King Ecbert for different reasons. But once again, I think it all ties into that. And if nothing else, like I said, some fulfillment, you know, some payoff that we finally got. Yes, we got to see Ethelstan be that conduit of peace, being that that intermediate, being the peacemaker amongst the two parties, you know, full-fledged. That's exactly what happened. Ethelstan was the emissary. Actually, I think on behalf of both of them, you know, because on the one hand, remember when we had the scene where Ethelstan is pretty much delivering the message to Ragnar and the rest of the Vikings, but then what happens when they show up back at the palace? King Ecbert is speaking Norse to them, and he's saying, yeah, Ethelstan was the one who taught me this so that I can communicate with you. You see what I'm saying? That's full fulfillment of the role that I've been wanting Ethelstan to play this whole fucking season. That's why I said, man, the deal maker. The deal maker. Oh, man. The deal maker. So let me see. Okay, second thing I want to talk about, and this is another character relationship that I finally felt, you know, got some sort of resolution, or at least got into a point now where I am satisfied with it, and that's Ragnar and Rollo's relationship. You all will recall from one of my earliest reviews, it was the one after Ragnar and his forces were able to get Kattegat back from Jarl Borg. You know, right before they invited him back to capture him and whatnot. When I mentioned, you know, the pivotal role that Rollo played in, you know, Kattegat's salvation and whatnot, you know, sort of, you know, trying to, you know, fend for the homeland and whatnot, and all his efforts to, you know, sort of rally the people to Ragnar's cause and whatnot. After the victory, I mentioned that I felt disappointed that there was never a scene where Ragnar said out loud, you know, there was never this catharsis where he finally, you know, forgave Rollo and, you know, told him, hey, I appreciate what you've done for my family and this, that, and the other. Now, granted, of course, you know, this is Vikings, so it's not like these are guys who really share their feelings all the time. And we saw that Ragnar took him back publicly. That's the wrong time, I think. Anyway, but we saw that Ragnar, you know, took him back publicly and whatnot. So, so at least we know that, yeah, they're not, you know, there doesn't seem to be any more animosity there. They're not at each other's throats anymore. That bad blood has pretty much been put to rest. But the scenes in this week's episode with Ragnar legitimately being concerned about Rollo's well-being, I think, spoke volumes more so than any other conversation really could, because here it was, down to the wire, when it really mattered. Rollo got defeated in battle, mortally wounded, and Ragnar was forced to leave him, not knowing what would happen to him. Even when Bjorn brought up to Ragnar, it's like, hey, we left him behind, you know, we need to stay until we find out what happens to him. And then they do find out that Rollo's still alive. Ragnar's like, no, I want my brother back, and I want to take him home so we can take care of him. And then in the scene, that gruesome scene when they're nursing Rollo back to health and they have to freaking pop the bone back into his leg. You know, we saw it on Ragnar's face that he was legitimately concerned for his brother's well-being. That right there, that satisfied me. I don't know about you guys. I was happy with that. All right. Let's see. And I think the only other real note I had... Oh, no. There is something else I want to mention. Well, yeah. This will pretty much tie into the last topic of my review, and that's the Ragnar King Horik feud. I think has finally gotten that last line in the sand. You know, if you can imagine each character sort of drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, cross it, and they keep crossing and they keep crossing and they keep jumping back and forth. This week's episode, I think, was that last one where it's like, okay, next time you cross this, one of us ain't walking away from this. And here's the thing. First off, we know that Ragnar has had to pretty much pick up the pieces of the fuckery that King Horik put into play at the end of last week's episode, right? He had to deal with that. You know, they had to have the battle. A lot of people died because King Horik was being a selfish ass. So, and Ragnar had to deal with that. So then finally, without even consulting Horik, not even giving a damn, you know, when Ragnar decides to agree to Ecbert's deal, he's like, no, this is it. I'm putting my foot down. That's it. Nothing else. And yeah, that's when that final line was drawn, because we know Horik didn't want that. And now, based off of the last scene of the episode, we know Horik is preparing to take those final measures to get rid of Ragnar. But another thing that I really liked, once again, about the character relationships, bringing it to the place it needs to be before the finale, was Ragnar and Floki, because Ragnar asked Floki straight up to his face in front of everybody, you know, when Floki mentioned, oh, how can we trust Ethelstan? You know, he forsaked his own gods for ours, and now he's forsaked ours for his old one, and this, that, and the other. And Ragnar asked him straight up in front of everybody, how can you talk to me about trust? And Floki's like, well, I'm a trustworthy person. And Ragnar's like, really? Are you? See, once again, you know, now this whole superstition and shit like that, it's like, no, it's out of the window now. Ragnar looked him dead in his eye, asked him a straight question. Floki gave him a straight response. And so that's why I think that final scene is all the more significant, because now we know where Ragnar and King Horik are at this point. And now we know where Ragnar and Floki seem to be at this point. So now it's just a matter of time of figuring out exactly where Horik and Floki are at this point. And that was the main purpose behind that final scene, because Horik needed to know, okay, I need to know, are you with me or are you with Ragnar? And if you're with me, then this is what we need to do. So it's going to be very interesting seeing how all of this plays out in the finale. I would have to imagine that this is when the conflict finally comes to a head. If both of them are still breathing after the finale, I will be highly surprised. But we'll see. So that's pretty much going to wrap up this week's episode review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. And in the comments below, please let me know your thoughts both on this week's episode and what are you guys expecting to see in next week's finale. What to keep an eye out for later this weekend. Tomorrow I will have my small council Game of Thrones Season 4 Episode 3, the Breaker of Chains live hangout discussion. That's going to be airing at 7 o'clock p.m. Central Standard Time, live right here on the OAW YouTube channel. And Saturday will be the next installment in my GOT character spotlight. Still haven't decided which character I will be discussing in this week's video, but you all will have to check out the video to find out. And then, of course, Sunday night, we'll be wrapping things up with this week's Game of Thrones episode review. And with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, signing off. And until next time, peace.